Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with Mr. Cern Basher. I came across Cern's content, I would say about 3-4 weeks ago, and I've since been binging all of his content because he takes you down a rabbit hole in terms of understanding the future of humanoid robotics. This is one of the most interesting spaces in the world right now. Tesla with Optimus Figure just raised $675 million with an all-star list of investors, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon at a $2.6 billion valuation. And you've got a bunch of other startups in the space really trying to figure out what is going to be the future of work. And is it going to be automated? And for all the jobs that no one really wants to do as a human being, could we automate that? And what did the unit economics on that actually look like? So Cern, thank you for being with me here today, and excited to talk about humanoid robotics.
Thanks, Amit. I'm excited to be here as well. And those questions that you have are some pretty small questions, right? I mean, the existence of humanity itself is in question.
It's going to be really, really fun. All right. So Cern sent me a slide deck that I'm going to pull up right now. And this slide deck is going to be a pretty good presentation to help us understand what is going on when it comes to robots and where this world is going. So I think, Cern, let's start it off with this. This is one of the first slides I'm seeing here. What the heck are these like robots? They look like humans. I know we have this new word called humanoid. I guess the first question is, why humanoid as the basis for this revolution to ultimately begin?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As we know that there are robots in the world today doing work. There's industrial robots that have their feet firmly planted on the ground with big long arms that do all kinds of work, make cars and so on. There's also robots in distribution centers like Amazon, little robots that just move things around. They kind of look like Roombas. So the reason for the humanoid form is that the world was largely designed for humans. We have created the world so that we can fit and operate within it. And so rather than making all these specialty robots, why not try to make a general purpose one that, like humans, can do lots of different things?
And so the idea is if humans are typically able to do this stuff, if something was in the form factor of a human, then that's way better than just like this random sort of design that a company makes, because the best use case for these things are the human body, since that's what we've been able to do.
In essence, and if you think many years ahead when you might have a robot in your house, do you want one that specializes in cooking versus one that specializes in folding laundry versus one that specializes in cleaning the floors? Wouldn't it make a whole lot more sense to have one that does everything?
Right.
Okay. And so that's why I think where we're headed. Now, we may also discover along the way that it does make sense for the robots to be designed for special purposes. For example, a humanoid robot doing roofing may not be the best format. You might want something that's more spider-like, or something that has super long legs or arms or something that is just more effective and efficient at doing roofing.
Okay, so let's get into these kind of core questions to get us through the podcast. Why do we need humanoid bots? I think we just talked about that in terms of what it would be like for humanity. But I guess we'll start off this question as well with what's going on in the labor force. So one of the things your work uniquely specializes on is where the lack of labor exists, the shortage of labor we have, kind of the population crisis we're having over the next couple of decades in terms of filling these jobs. A lot of people, when they think about humanoid robotics, they think about replacing human beings. And although that is a concern, I know for many of the startups in this space, including Elon, his argument is there's not enough humans to do the jobs anyway. So what is your take on that in regards to the labor force and how humans will eventually be replaced?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because that's where everybody's mind first goes is, oh my gosh, this is going to destroy human labor. And ultimately, I guess that's the long-term risk. But between here and there, there's a wide space of opportunity. In particular, there's a global shortage of labor as it stands today, right? And the consulting firm Korn Ferry estimates that there will be an 85 million job shortage by 2030. And they value that at $8.5 trillion.
That's a lot of jobs.
Yeah, it's an incredible amount of jobs, and companies today are already complaining that they have a hard time finding workers. So this has been a growing problem for many, many years. And so, like a lot of things where there's a problem, solutions come up to try to address the problem.
So with this global labor shortage and this idea that eventually we're going to need more things to be able to replace these jobs. Is the humanoid robotic thesis that there will not be enough humans to literally do the work, or that humans also will one day not be capable of doing some of this work, or kind of both? Like, I guess my question is, are we evolving to the point where humans are just way more advanced to not be stuck in a factory putting parts together like we've done for 40 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a number of different sort of layers to that. One is, are humans capable? Well, there are certainly a lot of workers that demographically, they'll be retiring in the coming years. There's a concern that a lot of the skills that those workers have will be forever lost because there's just not younger people coming up through the ranks that have those skills.
Right.
So that is definitely an issue. The other issue is that there are a lot of jobs out there that frankly are dangerous, if not deadly. Right. So think about being a coal miner, thinking about being a logger, think about working on the farm. There's a lot of jobs out there that, humans, if they really had a choice, they probably wouldn't choose to perform those jobs.
Correct.
Right. Yep. And there's a lot of jobs throughout history where that's the case. And we have technology now that has eliminated a lot of jobs, and humanoid bots will do the same for a lot of these dangerous and deadly jobs.
And I mean, is your broader assumption that companies also, because of how dangerous these jobs are, I mean, I'm looking at some of these headlines on the presentation here, they don't want that liability anymore. They want something that can just automate it, and so they don't have to worry about workers' comp?
I think that's a big part of it. I think lawsuits, there's a lot of jobs that involve chemicals that are pretty dangerous, so you have to be very careful. Not that they wouldn't want to be careful with humanoid robots, but if there is a chemical leak of some kind, it's nice if you can contain that and not have humans exposed to it.
Right.
In the Fukushima nuclear disaster, one of the goals was actually to inspect the plant and the destruction, and they wanted to send robots in there to look. And the problem was they didn't have the robots, and that spurred the DARPA challenge, the robotic challenge, to see if companies could come up with robots to do certain tasks. And that's really where this whole industry was really born out of that disaster.
Okay, so now in the context of efficient work, or what work is actually good work, I'm assuming useful work, the way you frame it, it needs to be work that is more efficient on a unit economic basis, with this idea of cost parity when it comes to the robot. So if you're paying a worker $90,000 a year, if that robot's not cheaper than that in some capacity, then there's kind of no point to this. And your argument is that we will be significantly cheaper and more effective with these robots.
Yeah, and for the simple reason that even if a robot is slower than a human at doing a particular task, it still may make economic sense to have that robot do that task. Now, certainly if it's dangerous and deadly and repetitive and boring and all that stuff where humans get tired and they may even fall asleep on the job, it would make sense to replace them with a robot. But even beyond that, the robot has a tremendous advantage that over humans. And one is that robots don't need to sleep. So a robot could work 22 hours a day. So even if the robot was only working at 1/3 the speed of a human, in theory, it still may make sense for that robot to do that task. Now, I think it's highly likely that we'll see robots be just as capable as humans in doing tasks. And in fact, in the future, even faster than humans.
Right.
So right now, if a robot could work at the same speed of a human, it would have a 3.5 times advantage over a human worker, because it can work 22 hours a day versus only 8 or so for a human. And of course, it can also work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Right. So even if the robot's slower, it's catching up while you sleep.
Ian says here in the chat, also, a lot of younger people do not want to train in those skills. The shortfall of 60,000 welders in the UK, young men are going for gaming programming. Do you think that's the case as well, that young men, they're trying to be software engineers versus welders, and that's going to contribute to this shortage as well?
I think that's been an issue for a long time. Absolutely. There's a lot of jobs that people just don't want to do. They're just not interested in. It's their father's job, perhaps, and they just don't want to be involved in that. They just don't see that as an opportunity. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about unit economics. So this is the fun part of this. This is the part that I'm excited about. So the global industry for these robotics, Figure just raised $675 million. Optimus is, I mean, I'm assuming Elon's throwing billions of dollars into trying to get that up and started. And there's a lot of other robotic startups. Why is everyone going after this? And why do they think this is going to be what I've heard is a multi-trillion-dollar TAM, with the largest TAM we've ever had in human history?
Yeah, with this slide, I've tried to come up with a fairly simplistic way of kind of putting this into perspective, and I'm comparing the opportunity to the oil industry. Most of us are familiar with the oil industry. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil a day. And if the average cost of that oil is $75, then the value of the oil consumed every day around the world is $7.5 billion a day, right? It's a colossal industry.
Right.
And actually, the oil industry doesn't just, process and sell crude oil. It's also gasoline and chemicals and other things. And so the industry's revenue per day is about 19 billion. So most people, I think, have an understanding that the oil industry is huge. Maybe they weren't aware of the size of these numbers, but $19 billion a day of revenue, in my book, is a pretty big business, right? Now, let's look at the global labor market. Let's say there's 3.5 billion people that are working. And I've seen numbers that range from 3 to 4 billion, depending on how you measure it. So 3.5 billion people. Let's say that the average wage is $30 a day. Now, in the developed world, it's higher. In the emerging world, it's lower. So average out to about $30 a day. Then the value of global labor is $105 billion a day. So that's 5.5 times bigger than the oil industry, right? So labor itself is enormous. Now, not all these laborers could ever be replaced by a robot. A lot of these workers are not doing physical work, right? They're doing the work that you and I are doing right now. Now, there's a threat there too from AI that's not in a body. It's just AI in a computer system. So AI in general, whether it's in robotic form or not, is a threat to human labor.
Okay, so this right here is what all these startups are looking at. This $105 billion potential estimated value of labor per day. And so that's getting a lot of them excited about the market opportunity. Is there any way that you think we're getting that wrong in terms of that market opportunity, or that seems to be one of the parts of the humanoid thesis that's correct, that it really is a TAM that is just gigantic to go after?
Well, yes and no. So you could say, well, there's a lot of jobs that humanoid robots will never be able to do. And sure, I'll agree with you on that. And it may take a long time to get there. Okay, fine. It's going to take a couple of decades or even longer. Fine. But you could also say that number is low, because anytime you have the opportunity to drive down the cost of something to such low levels, and we'll get into the numbers here in a minute, you're going to have more of it. So think about all the trash and stuff that's around cities. If you could pay a humanoid robot, cost you $3 an hour to have them pick up trash, suddenly that may seem economical, and it's like, well, why not keep our cities clean? That's just one kind of silly example, but there's a lot of jobs or tasks out there that today are just not economical to do. And with a cheap enough form of labor, then why wouldn't you do it? So in some sense, you could actually have more humanoid bots on the planet than people at some point.
Wow.
Right? That is not inconceivable.
Right.
And then extending beyond that, think about, if we're going to go to Mars, you might want to send the bots before you send people.
Well,
right?
That's an interesting part, because one of the other parts of the thesis I've been learning is that forget just working at a warehouse. If the future of civilization, which is what Elon is screaming about, is under threat because this Earth might not exist one day, yeah, if we could have a test case of people go out and see what's actually on Mars before risking human lives, which it is it's a very high risk that those humans don't make it, that would be that's priceless, one could imagine.
Yeah. It's also a lot less costly, right? Humans need food, they need oxygen. Humanoid bots in a starship do not need life support. In fact, you can unplug them while they're traveling. They can be, asleep while they're traveling. So it's a different cost equation. It would make a lot of sense. And of course, then if things go wrong, horribly wrong, and the starship crashes or something on landing, okay, so what? There's no harm to human life. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And that's further out there, and my models don't include that at all. But certainly to those that say this is a limited potential, I actually think it's in the tens of billions potential ultimately.
Okay, so let's talk about how much it costs to make one of these bots? So it's got to be cheap. It's got to be unit economical. What do you, or how would you think the cost would be to the Western world to buy these bots?
Yeah, if you just flip to the next slide, actually. Yeah, so first of all, let's just have an understanding of how many bots might be made. And one quick way to look at it is to say, okay, the world's largest automakers make 10 to 11 million vehicles a year. But a bot actually weighs about 3% of a car. These bots are actually pretty light compared to a vehicle. So in bot equivalents, the auto industry could make 2.5 billion bots a year based on weight. Okay. Now, another example is the cell phone industry, the smartphone industry. Apple spits out about 200 million iPhones a year. Samsung sells 225 million a year. And based on weight on that, the 1.3 billion devices a year would convert to only 13 million bots.
Wow.
So my conclusion with this was it's not so much driven by weight, it's just driven by the demand that's out there. If there was a demand for more than 1.3 billion cell phones a year, the cell phone makers could easily make it. They just don't need to. There's not enough demand.
Right. There's not a constraint on the actual product itself. It's all about demand.
That's right. So this analysis was all well and fine, but it's not based on weight. So here's the kind of the cost to make, and I've got a couple of different examples here. And this is the Optimus bot estimate weight of about 120 pounds. The battery pack is about 30 pounds of that, and the weight without the battery is about 90. Okay, and it's about 3% of the weight of a Model 3. I'm not an expert in this field, so I've relied on a couple of people to cost this out for me. And in this particular example, the total cost of all the items is about $12,000. Now, these aren't the costs today. This is an estimate of the cost once there's enough bots being built where you're kind of at scale.
Right.
And you get the benefits of the economies of scale. The biggest cost, the biggest component cost is the actuators. It's the systems that make all the bot parts move. In the Tesla bot, I believe there are 42 actuators in Optimus. And so the cost right now of those are pretty expensive because Tesla and the other robot makers have had to make their own actuators. There's no existing actuator industry out there that's making the actuators that they need to the specifications that they want them.
Are there any other commercial industries that use actuators? Like, do cars have actuators, or it's really exclusive to bots?
I think other robotics systems use actuators, yes.
Okay.
Apparently for humanoid bots, my understanding is the ones that exist in the world today just aren't quite where they need them to be. That I'm sure will change. There will be companies that will specialize in making actuators. Some of the bot makers may choose to make them themselves, like Tesla probably will continue to do so.
Right.
And other bot manufacturers will probably look to outsource that. So the cost of a Model 3, let's say, is about $30,000. A bot might be, 40% of that by these cost estimates. And if you go to the next slide, Scott Walter has an estimate where his bot cost is about $8,500. So it's about 30 to 40% of the cost of a Model 3 is the estimate will be the cost to make of a bot.
It's much cheaper than a car.
It should be much cheaper than a car. On a mass basis, it's only 3% of the weight of the car. And on a cost basis, maybe 30 to 40% of the cost of a car. And I've even seen some projections where it's lower than this. Ultimately, I think once the industry is making hundreds of millions of these, the cost will get driven way down.
Okay, so maybe 8 to 12K on making the car. So now the question is, how much will it cost, I guess, to use the bot itself?
Yeah, so here is the approach that I've taken on this. Is you need to compare, if you're going to use a humanoid bot, what's the next best alternative? And right now, that next best alternative is human labor. So on this chart, I have shown on the x-axis different wage rates, $5 an hour up to $40 an hour. Let's just focus on the middle one at $15 an hour. Okay, the actual cost to a company to employ somebody and pay them $15 an hour is more than that. You have to take into account taxes and benefits and other costs.
Right.
So it's more like $22 an hour, let's call it. Now, actually, it's higher than this because you have to factor in recruiting and the cost of HR and the cost of legal and the cost of management and stuff like that. This is just looking at the employee and the cost for that employee, not including other overhead costs. So these numbers are actually low. Okay, so this is what the bot is up against, right? And so if you were going to consider replacing a human with a bot, then you have to make sure that the bot costs less than $22 an hour.
Right.
So this is the hurdle. This is the hurdle bot makers have to cross. Okay. If you go to the next slide, by my calculations and the models that I have, I think that at $15 an hour, again using that as a proxy for the bot's capability, it's doing $15 an hour work, that the all-in cost for a bot will be around $750.
Mm.
And I'll share with you in a second as to how I get there. But the $750, by the way, includes the cost of the bot, it includes cost of maintenance, it includes charging, it includes the cost of human minders to oversee the bot. So it's kind of an all-in cost. It's more all-in than the 2185 is for the humans.
Right. It's much cheaper. It's almost 4x cheaper.
Yeah, and it's much cheaper. And the interesting thing is, if you go to the next slide, the cost difference between bots and humans per my model, and this just kind of came out that way, and it's kind of elegant in terms of how it came out, that at $15 an hour work, the cost savings is also about $15 an hour.
Wow.
Between humans and bots. So you can use the wage rate as a proxy for your savings. Right? So if you're a manufacturing firm and your employees cost you $15 an hour, that's the wage rate, you could actually save that $15 an hour by deploying capable humanoid bots. Now, we're not there yet. The bots are not yet capable enough for this math to pan out just yet, but this is where we're headed. And then what happens is eventually the bots become capable of doing $20 an hour work. And so your savings becomes $20 an hour, and then 30 and 40. So you're moving from a labor source in humans that are great but flawed in so many ways to a labor force that's getting better and better over time. So here's how the numbers actually look. If you were to just go to the chart above, yeah, that one. The lifetime savings of a bot, and I'm assuming a bot lasts 10 years, and I've got a healthy amount in there for maintenance costs. If you were to deploy a bot at doing $15 an hour work, you could save about $615,000.
Wow.
Now, I'm assuming that the bot makers keep some of that, right? They have to price their bot at a certain price. And so let's say they keep half. They give half the savings to the manufacturing firm, logistics firm, and they keep half for themselves. If they were to sell bots, that would be a $307,000 sales price.
Correct.
Right. So for the people out there that think they can buy a bot for $25,000, no, it's not happening anytime soon, because these bots are more valuable to companies that run manufacturing operations or logistics basically 24/7.
Right.
That's where the demand is going to come from, because the cost savings are so massive. So if you want one in your house, you're going to have to pay up. Eventually, maybe the bots become that cheap, but not initially.
Cern, when do you think these startups realize this? Do you think it's been a couple of years that they did the math that you're doing right now, and then they decided to start going on this journey?
You know, it's a good question, because I have independently come at these numbers just through working through numbers on a spreadsheet and thinking this through. And I have heard from some people in the industry that these are similar numbers that the bot makers have come to themselves.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, approach this from, in some sense, first principles, and say, okay, how would you approach this? What does the economics look like? And we're all coming up with kind of similar numbers. So there's no real magic to it.
Yeah, I mean, these seem to make a lot of sense. I've seen some of your other videos with these numbers, and I don't think you're trying to be overly conservative or optimistic. You're trying to just give a realistic understanding of what it would look like.
Yeah. Now, I believe over the long term that the numbers will look a little different than this, but for now, while there's, for many years, while the competition is limited and you'll be supply constrained,
right?
The bot makers, this may be sort of how the industry looks. I do believe that the bot makers will not actually sell their bots for the most part. They will offer them as robots as a service, just like human labor today. You don't own your employees; they walk in and out your door every day. You pay them an hourly rate or a monthly wage. Same thing with the bots. And so the monthly subscription price for a bot that's worth, or that sells for $300 and $7,000 would be about $2,650 a month, right? And so that's, you know, pretty low cost,
Right.
right, for a bot that can work 22 hours a day, you know, to pay $2,650
I mean, that's
a
in
month for it.
that's like that's the I mean, that's just it's unbelievable that that could be the savings for a company on that.
Yeah.
So you think
And
these companies want to do it as a service, almost like a SaaS business, essentially?
I think they will because of a couple reasons. One is they want to maintain control over what the bots are used for. You don't really want to sell them and then discover that all your bots are being used in a light
Yeah.
bulb somewhere,
Right, right.
right? Or for nefarious purposes that they may not agree with, right? Like a security force or something that's bullying people in the park or whatever. So part of it too is from the company's perspective of warranty. Like, how long are these bots going to last? Will they last 10 years? Well, you can take that concern off the table if you say, you know what, we're just offered as a service. If it breaks down, we'll bring you a new one. No questions asked, right? So it's a bit like hiring an employee. If an employee gets sick and can no longer work, then the company replaces that employee with somebody else.
Right.
Now, in
Right.
the case of the employee, the company may actually have some costs to bear in terms of the employees get sick. In the case of robots, that they don't, you just scrap them and move on to the next one. So I have sort of posited that this is such a massive and unique change that company leaders need to be aware of this and need to be on top of it, because what's going to happen is once the robots get to a point where they're capable of doing $10 an hour work, $15 an hour work, the demand is going to be so huge, and yet the supply will not be where the demand is. Think
Mm,
about where NVIDIA is today with their chips,
right.
right? Everybody wants them. They can only make so many. So if you are a company, let's think about, you know, FedEx versus UPS. Let's say UPS gets the box before FedEx does. UPS is now saving massively on its labor costs while FedEx is still stuck on the old model. So I'm looking at this as these companies better be aware of this and start thinking about this today and plan for this. And they may even want to consider partnering up with the bot companies to
Mm.
make sure that they are first in line to get the bots when they're ready. Because if you don't and your competitor does, you're history, right? Because the cost savings are so dramatic.
It's interesting if companies knew what the impact of a GPU would be 7 years ago, even 3 years ago, you'd think they might have like created some special deals with Nvidia, while maybe even gave some money to Nvidia, anything Nvidia needed, and been friendly with them so that Nvidia wouldn't price gouge the crap out of them when they had a monopoly on these GPUs. And you're saying essentially that's how companies should be thinking about an Optimus or a Figure bot if they are a FedEx or a UPS or a Walmart or something like that.
And I would go as far as saying that they should treat this as a call option on the very survival of their company.
Wow.
If they don't treat this seriously enough, they could find themselves on the back foot for years. And by then it's too late. Once they get their bots, they'll be out of business.
Okay, so let's do some examples on this, because you brought up UPS, FedEx. This slide has Walmart, Target, and Kroger, three very big retail chains. Kroger, a very big grocery chain. All three of these companies are public companies. Can you walk me through why these three companies need to immediately think deeply about the robotics industry?
Sure. And this is a very simplified example. That's much more complex than this, but I think at this simple level, just to get the point across, this hopefully will make some sense. Let's focus on Walmart first. Walmart worldwide has 2.3 million employees. They have a turnover rate of about 40% a year. They have to hire 1 million plus people a year. So you could think of bots not replacing people, but just helping Walmart deal with the turnover. Let's assume that Walmart on average paid their employees $15 an hour. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. It's a guess on my part. I think maybe in the United States that may be pretty close in many areas. And it cost them, again, the $21.85 an hour effectively.
Right.
So their total labor cost, let's call it, is $100 billion a year. Let's say they were able to replace 1/3 of their employees, 805,000 of them. Again, it's less than 1 year's turnover, with humanoid robots. But because bots have an advantage of 3.5 to 1, they can work 22 hours a day when humans can only work 8. You only need 230,000 bots.
Wow.
Again, assuming the bot works at the same speed and capabilities as a human. We're not there yet.
Right.
So Walmart could save $23 billion a year. That just so happens to be an amount that's about equal to their last 12 months pre-tax income. They could double their profits by deploying bots.
Goodness.
Now, would Walmart just take the money and pocket it? Maybe some, but what they would probably do is lower prices, and that would put hurt on the competition like Target and Kroger. So imagine a world where Walmart has bots and Target and Kroger do not. Suddenly, Target and Kroger are not cost competitive anymore with Walmart.
Right.
Right? If Walmart could take out $23 billion of costs, what could they do in terms of inflicting pain on the competition with that 23 billion in savings? If they reduce prices to the tune of 23 billion,
Yeah.
consumers might flow from Target to Walmart.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to be complete, Target has the same opportunity, and so does Kroger. Now, Kroger appears to be a company that maybe is a bit more labor intensive. So they only need about 20% to replace 20% of their workforce with bots in order to get that 100% improvement in profit. Or it might have also been the case that maybe Kroger's profits were temporarily low for some reason over the last 12 months. But anyway, I think we're in the ballpark here in terms of potential.
At these companies, would the bots be like stocking shelves, or you're talking about more back-end stuff?
Yes and yes. Think about these companies, how much stuff there is to move around.
Right.
From distribution center to distribution center to the stores, from the trucks in the stores to the shelves and restocking and reordering things during the night. A lot of labor at these companies is spent just moving stuff around. This is work that is perfect for a humanoid bot. It will tirelessly do this work for 22 hours a day without complaint, without any issues at all.
Right.
And it eventually will be perfect at doing this, and it'll be as fast and eventually faster than a human at doing this work. Doesn't need any breaks. You don't need to change the shift. You just need to charge the bot every now and then. And so it may actually free up a lot of employees from those, those tasks and make them more front facing and actually deal with customers so that your experience in going to Walmart now is better. You can actually find a person to help you.
Right.
Right. So there's opportunities at different levels here. It's not just about replacing humans with bots. It's maybe about repurposing humans to different tasks within the company to make them more effective.
Okay, so then we have a similar example of Amazon, UPS, and FedEx, and kind of the same argument that there's just massive cost savings here.
And here I just said, if they replace a third of their workforce with bots, what does that look like? What does that do to their pre-tax net income? For Amazon, it's a 66% increase. For UPS, it's 46. For FedEx, it's 120.
Wow.
So incredible numbers. Bigger picture, longer term. This is not tomorrow. This is not next year. This is over time.
Okay. Yep. So then we have a bot model comparison. We kind of went through the, well, actually, let's go this. Yeah. The revenue per bot. What was that? What would that look like to the actual bot companies?
Yeah. So this is looking more near term. And Chris Camillo, a couple months ago, came out with his bot model, and I had mine. And so this is a comparison of the two of them. In Chris's model, he's saying that we could see 1.5 million bots in service by 2030. And again, think about the 85 million job shortage that Korn Ferry is predicting by 2030. Right. So 1.5 million bots is a drop in the bucket to that shortage. It's not replacing any humans anytime soon.
Yeah.
But at 1.5 million, a company by Chris's model would have a gross profit per bot of about $84,000, right? And if you multiply that by 1.5 million and put a PE of 80 on it, he gets to a $10 trillion value. Now, you could say this is the industry or this is one company. This is Tesla, this is Figure, this is Apptronic, this is Agility, whoever it is. Just the deployment of 1.5 million bots gets you to a market value that today would be beyond the world's largest company on the planet.
Wow.
My model is a little bit more conservative, but still I get to a $7 trillion value. And I joke, what's 3 trillion among friends? Fine. Uh, you know, but it just shows the potential, even at relatively small numbers of bot deployments, in terms of what this industry could become. And 1.5 million is a small number in terms of what, the total bot deployments that we expect to see over time.
Yeah, I mean, if the thesis that 85 million jobs will be lost, or even 1/4 of that, 20 million jobs will be lost, then 1.5 million is truly a drop in the bucket. And if these cost estimates and margins are somewhat accurate, then yeah, that's going to be a very, very big business, especially if we just went through the fact that Amazon needs to do it because UPS is doing it, because FedEx is also doing it. It kind of feels like the internet, where like if you don't have a website, you're screwed.
This is even more important than that. This is labor, which is, again, the biggest part of GDP. This is mission critical for any company that employs physical labor. Yeah. The internet's huge. The internet is massive, but I think this is bigger than that.
I mean,
this is what.
I was going to say, the fact that even Jensen Huang says that AI is a bigger opportunity than the internet, and robotics is kind of, I mean, it's all coming together in terms of what this looks like.
This is why Jensen, I think, is saying that. And of course, this is AI embodied. A robot is just AI in a human-like form. Jensen's thinking about AI in totality, where robotics is a part of that. But I'm putting some numbers to, kind of his statement. I'm helping folks understand what he's talking about here.
Right.
This is what the business model potentially looks like for a humanoid bot maker, using robots as a service, RAAS, robots as a service. And you're looking at profit margins between 60 and 70%. This is net profit margins. Okay. And you're looking at a profit per bot, depending on the capability. And I think at the bottom is this cutoff on that chart, the different wage rates, from $5 to 40, of $6,000 a year of profit up to 60,000. Now, if you think about how much Tesla makes in selling a vehicle, let's say, if they're lucky, let's say it's, $8,000 to $10,000.
Right.
Well, that's one time. This is that number or more every year for the life of a bot. So this is a very different business model than selling automobiles. And that's why, a lot of people are very excited about this industry.
Yeah, I mean, cars don't have good margins. We all know that. Tesla gets away with it because they're Tesla. But if this thing is not a car, and this thing, one could argue, is much more powerful than a car for businesses.
That's right. So now let's look at the industry potential looking out beyond, 1.5 million. What does it look like at 150 million? Okay, well, I've knocked the bot price per hour, the orange number there in the middle column, down to $5 an hour.
Wow.
Okay, that's how much it costs you for the bot, $5 an hour. That gets you to industry revenue of 5 trillion, industry profits of 3 trillion, and a PE of 60 gets you to $240 trillion market value for the industry. I don't think we'll just see one company as a player here. There'll be plenty of bot companies. And right now we're tracking 21 different bot projects.
Right.
If we get to 1 billion bots, I've got the bot cost per hour here at $3 an hour. Okay. That's 21 trillion in revenue. It's 11 trillion in profit. And at a PE of just 30, that's a $450 trillion market value for the bot industry. Now, I think I've been pretty conservative on these numbers, and I don't think 1 billion is even the limit here. We talked about earlier about more bots than people on the planet. So put another 0 on this, potentially.
Right. When someone says, "Hey, Cern, this is crazy," what is your response to that?
Well, it depends on your frame of mind. It's crazy today. These bots are not capable of doing this today. But tell me where I'm wrong. Like, call me crazy, but tell me where I'm wrong. Right? Are bots going to work for $1 an hour? Okay, let's run those numbers. It still looks pretty good.
Right.
Are there going to be only 500 million instead of 1 billion bots? Okay, let's run those numbers. How does it look? Like, the model here it's available for anybody to put the numbers in they want and run it and see how it looks, right? I'm trying to be as transparent as possible about my calculations. So you tell me where you think I'm wrong, and let's look at the output. Maybe you don't like a PE of 30. Maybe you only want a PE of 10. Okay, fine. 150 trillion. That's fine.
What's 200 trillion between friends, right? So,
well, I might quibble a little bit over that number, but 3 trillion, I'll let go. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is absolutely incredible stuff. Okay, so this is the industry potential. Then we've got the actual deployments of these bots. So you think by 2040, 1.5 billion bots could be deployed?
Well, let me preface this by saying this is not a prediction. This is simply an illustration. But a lot of people say, okay, when is this going to happen? So I say, okay, let's look at this. Let's say this year only 10 bots are deployed. Okay, that seems reasonable. Elon has said that next year that they may start manufacturing bots. And so I say, okay, next year only 100. Elon's famous for being late on his timelines.
Right.
Let's say the industry in 2 years, 2.5 years, 2026, by the end of that year, 10,000 bots are deployed. That doesn't seem unreasonable. You would hope that Microsoft and OpenAI and Jeff Bezos get a return on their investment for putting 675 million into Figure, that they can produce something by the next 2.5, 3 years. All right, so then the industry is ramping up to 100,000 in 2027, then 600,000, 1.5 million, right? And these, by the way, are the cumulative bot deployments. Right. This is not the production each year, but this is the cumulative total year after year. So I think this is actually not a crazy ramp. And it takes you to 2033 to 2034 before we hit anywhere near that 85 million number. That's a shortage of jobs in 2030. So the bot industry actually is behind in terms of meeting the challenge there of finding 85 million bots to do the work. So to some, these numbers may look crazy. I actually think that they actually could be kind of conservative. And others have told me, no, they're not aggressive enough. So it just depends on how you want to look at this. But this is one illustration as to what it might look like. And so then if you go to the next table, if we just take these numbers and accept them and say, okay, this is a plausible scenario, what I've done here is to say, okay, the bots may be deployed at $20 an hour initially. But over time, that's going to come way down, all the way down to $3 an hour for the cost of deploying a bot. It's an 80-some% drop in the cost, 85%. And the industry revenue at 1.5 billion bots by 2040 is $31 trillion. Okay. And if the profit margin is 50%, and in the previous model I showed you it was 60 to 70, but let's say it's 50%,
right?
You've got 15 to 16 trillion in industry profit, and put a PE of 36 on that. That's a $567 trillion industry. Again, tell me what numbers you'd like to use. I'm happy to plug them in, and let's see what the result is. Right? Maybe this timeline for bots deployed gets pushed back a few years. Okay, it doesn't really matter. It's still the biggest industry we've ever seen.
I mean, yeah, I don't. I mean, this is what I get your point now when you were saying this is much bigger than the internet, not only from a monetary perspective, but it's just like this is much bigger and it scales at a different rate than I think we've ever seen in terms of a total TAM. I mean, the internet is quite frankly just advertising, right? That's the business model for pretty much YouTube. It's just ads. Like ads are not as special as actual labor at a factory.
The internet doesn't make anything. It facilitates the making of stuff, but the internet doesn't actually physically do anything. This is a new form of labor. We're inventing a new form of labor. And again, to hit the point home, labor is the biggest component of GDP.
Right.
So we're inventing a new form of that. So it absolutely follows this is going to be the biggest industry in the world.
Okay, so PE ratios, how are you getting to these?
Yeah, this is just a graph of the numbers on the previous slide, just to show it, in a visual format. I'm assuming that the PE comes way down over time, that early on in industry, that the PE can be very high because of the industry's potential. You're talking about a total potential market here of 5 billion bots, 10 billion, whatever the number is. So the PE should be very high. And you can see for Figure, the company has no earnings, and yet they raised $675 million at a valuation of 2.6 billion. So the PE basically is infinite right now in Figure. Okay. And again, for good reason, because they're looking at the market opportunity, not looking at what Figure's profit and loss is today. So over time, though, as the industry matures, the PE should come down. And these are the numbers I'm using in this illustration, from a PE of 200 down to 36, which I think 36 is conservative at that point in 2040. And then also, I'm assuming that the rate that the bot makers get per bot per hour comes down from 20 down to $3 an hour.
Right.
Okay. If you want to use lower numbers, that's fine. It doesn't really matter.
Do you think that Figure, let's talk about them for a second. Do you think they were able to get NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, all these guys at I mean, 2.6 billion for an 18-month startup? Some people would say that's crazy. Do you think they got that because those companies are also looking at these numbers and they're saying the valuation right now is irrelevant compared to the potential?
Yes. Those companies, I believe, understand the opportunity. And I believe that Figure could have raised a lot more than 675 million. I'm sure that they were turning investors away. So the challenge is, how much money do you really need? How much do you want to take in? You take in kind of what you think you need. Hopefully to the point where, they're making, they have revenue and they start to not need outside funds. That would be the ideal situation. So I think that in my view, it looks like investors are kind of throwing money at them and saying, here, take whatever you want. We've got it.
Right.
Because they see the potential in this. Right. I don't think Jeff Bezos needs to look at my charts to understand the potential of this.
Right.
Right. I don't think Microsoft and OpenAI need this either, but I'm out there independently sort of talking about the potential for this industry. I've never seen anything like it. Yeah.
Okay. So industry profit you've got at 600 billion by 2040, or that's 600 billion.
That's the market cap. That's a mere 600 trillion, 550 trillion. The profit is the orange line. It's about $15 trillion in profit. What I'm illustrating on this chart is that the market cap will lead the profit. The market cap will go up faster than the profits do. But over time, as the PE compresses, the market cap starts to level off.
Right.
And the profits continue to grow and close that gap.
Right. Okay.
So this is another reason for, as an investor, you want to be early in on something that's growing rapidly, because you're going to see the biggest gains relatively early.
Where do you think the money's going to leave if if investors say, all right, if robots are the future, I want to invest in robots, like let's say these companies go public, etc. Where do you think that money rotates out of? Does it rotate out of the Apples of the world or something like that?
I believe that Apple actually will be one of the major players in this space. It makes a lot more sense for Apple to be making or be involved in humanoid bots than it does to be involved in EVs. The humanoid bots, actually, I have talked about them as being a new computing platform. It won't replace the phone. It won't replace the computer necessarily, but you'll be able to interact with the humanoid bot just as though you're on a phone or a computer.
Right.
And so in that sense, it's a new form of computing. You'll be able to talk to it. It could read your emails to you. It could talk to you in any language. The capabilities of these things will just be astonishing. So, right now you can talk to ChatGPT on your phone. You could talk to your bot. It has a large language model. The interface will just be like conversing with another human. So it makes a lot of sense for companies like Apple to be involved. And I think that Apple and ultimately Google and Facebook and others will be involved. And I expect to hear over the coming months announcements from other startup robotics companies of their investors and their partnerships. So it would shock me to see over the next year, it would shock me if Google was not involved. It would shock me if Apple ultimately is not involved in some way.
Right. Okay, so then we have the bot deployments, and basically it's kind of the same thing you were saying, that by 2040, we're just going to have a ridiculous amount of scale when it comes to these bots.
Yeah, this was an attempt at 4 different scenarios, again, illustrating 4 different things: a slow start, a slow ramp, slow start, a fast ramp, fast start, slow ramp, fast start, fast ramp. 4 different scenarios. You pick the one that you think is interesting to you. Look at the results, right? It doesn't really matter. It matters maybe in 2030 in terms of the potential and the value of the industry, but ultimately by 2040, it's massive either way you look at it. Even though these pathways look very different, it results in a absolutely massive industry. If you skip ahead to the chart 2, yeah, you can go to that one. This is the numbers behind the chart. And then if you want to look at the visual on the next page, by 2040, you can see all 4 lines are quickly coming together.
Wow.
That the industry valuation is in that 300 to 500 trillion range.
Okay, so I know people in the chat have some questions. Let us know, guys, if you have any questions. I think I have Cern here for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll be done. So, Cern, Tesla has been disregarded by the street. Obviously, we've seen what's happened to the stock this year. Elon has been tweeting a lot about politics, and there's Elon doing what he's doing. So the whole Tesla thesis right now is a little in flux, at least for Wall Street. Do you think Wall Street is not even kind of factoring these numbers into their estimates? And as a result, do you think Wall Street really is late to understanding what this industry could be like?
Wall Street is not factoring these numbers into their estimates. Absolutely not. I doubt that Wall Street even wants to think about humanoid robots. They barely want to think about the concept of self-driving vehicles, even though that is coming as well. Right. And so humanoid bots, Wall Street is not thinking about this. None of the Wall Street analysts have anything to do with this in their models. And if they do, it's heavily, heavily discounted. And it should be discounted, but not as much, in my opinion, as they have.
Do you think Elon is not doing a good enough job about marketing this, or do you think he just doesn't care about getting Wall Street to understand? Because if Wall Street did understand this, I would argue Tesla would be worth a lot more than it's at right now. If this is a $450 trillion market and Tesla's at 500 billion.
Yeah, it's actually in Elon's interest right now to not talk about this too much, because they need to recruit. So they need to talk about enough to get some people excited that they want to go work for Tesla and be a part of this team. And that's the purpose, I think, of showing the videos and doing the demonstrations that they've done. Right? They've all been recruiting events. But ultimately, it's not in Elon's interest to have the stock run up, because all those employees that come on, you want to give them time to accumulate stock and so on. So it doesn't make sense for Tesla stock to, jump whatever amount it's going to jump eventually. You want this to kind of happen naturally. Elon doesn't need to hype this. And now what's happened is there's other companies. You've got the successive figure in attracting money and validating the space with their investors that Tesla doesn't even need to talk about this. In my view, this is an opportunity for individual investors who have a long enough time horizon, who don't have to answer to anybody on Wall Street about their returns in any given year. Right. And this is why Wall Street firms and folks like Gary Black and others are so focused on the quarterly results, because they need to deliver returns on a calendar year basis. That's how they're judged. Right. They may all say that they're long-term focused, but at the end of the day, they're running money in a fund and they have to produce returns year in and year out. And it causes them to be very short-term focused.
Right.
Right. Focused on deliveries and margins and the quarterly earnings, when in reality, none of that matters to where Tesla is going in the future.
Do you think Elon has moved past FSD and the cars as like the primary thing that is defining Tesla, and his mind is on Optimus? Or do you think he still cares about, I got to figure this robotaxi thing out, then I'll do Optimus? Or is he just doing everything at once like Elon always does?
In my view, it appears that Elon understands the potential value of AI, right? Whether it's Dojo, whether it's FSD, whether it's robotaxi, whether it's bots, it's all AI, right? It's taking AI and doing something useful with it. That, to me, is what Elon is focused on. I believe he understands the economic potential of this. He's actually talked about this. People generally ignore him when he talks about the potential of humanoid bots, right? But I think we're at the point now with the development in the industry, ignore it at your own risk.
Garcia asks, could you ask Cern how the battery size or life will be handled if AI will be running on NVIDIA chips? So I guess the question here is, do the robots run on NVIDIA chips, and how do you think of a battery business based on these robots running on those chips?
It's my understanding that they're using the hardware for so same system that's in Tesla cars. it's essentially half the size. The Tesla cars, there's two chips, and the robot there's only one. You don't need the same kind of redundant system that you have in a vehicle. So it's Tesla's own chip. I don't believe it's NVIDIA. In terms of battery life and so on, it's not going to be a problem for these bots. Even if the batteries only last a few hours, it doesn't take long to charge them. In many cases, the robots will be able to charge in place, either through induction charging or actually plugging them in.
Yeah.
So the charging issue really, really is a non-issue. Some people have talked about battery swapping. Scott Walter and I have done some work on that, and we don't think that's really going to be necessary. There may be some applications where it makes sense, but for the most part, it's not necessary.
Boston Dynamics, why haven't they figured this stuff out? They've been around for a while. Why is Figure raising half a $1 trillion?
Well, Boston Dynamics, I mean, full credit to them for being a pioneer in this industry. It's largely been a research effort, and their ownership has kind of shifted. Google owned them for a period of time, and now Hyundai Motor Corp owns them. And so we may see a change in their focus to commercializing Atlas. However, Atlas and the way it's constructed is not particularly safe for humans to be around. Atlas in the past, you needed to program Atlas's every single move, but they have an opportunity to also shift to an AI-powered robot. And so we'll see if they're up to that challenge. We have heard that Hyundai, their Kia division, we're expecting an announcement with Boston Dynamics and Kia at some point this year. And that video that we saw of Atlas recently, where Atlas was moving some automotive parts from one bin to a shelf, that may be a sign of things to come.
JC says, Amit, can you ask what role our electric grid will play in the robotics age? Cern, do we have the energy to power all these bots?
I think this is the biggest concern that Elon has been talking about lately. That the grid and the grid operators are not fully aware of the challenge and are not fully sort of up to speed on dealing with it, even if they're aware of it. And he's been out there talking about the imperative of expanding the grid, strengthening the grid, et cetera. So this, from time to time, may become a limitation in some areas. Absolutely.
Okay, last question I have for you, Cern, and then we'll get you out of here. For those that are here, please make sure to follow Cern on Twitter. I'm putting his Twitter in the chat, and it is already in the description. You'll get a lot of nice robotics tweets all in your feed. So people that want to actually have one of these things do their laundry, cook for them, etc. I've watched Brett talk about this concept, and he believes that's farther away. Right now, it's about can the enterprises and can we deal with warehouses, and then we'll figure out the consumer application. What are your concerns / maybe optimistic thoughts on a robot is in your house? Some people say this thing might try to kill you if it gets to AGI, or maybe it's just too expensive to have in your house, or are you super optimistic that it's going to be your personal assistant for everything? It might pseudo replace your phone for a task. What are your concerns about consumers working with robots?
Right now, I have none. Right now, they're going to be focused on what you would call a structured environment, like a factory or a warehouse or a distribution center, highly structured, controlled environments. You could actually separate the robots from the humans.
Right.
So even if they wanted to try to kill you, they wouldn't be able to. So we're going to have many, many years of these things working in those kinds of environments before we set them loose in unstructured environments like people's houses.
Right.
So I'm not worried about that at all at this point. I mean, it's great to theorize and worry about that stuff, but the reality is these things are going to be well contained, for many, many years to come. And again, the reason is simply economics. They are so much more valuable working 22 hours a day in a factory than they are working several hours a day in my home. Right now, unless I and 10 other neighbors want to go in on deploying a robot together and it goes from house to house and does work, that may be one viable thing ultimately. But the robot manufacturers, their focus and the lowest hanging fruit right now is to have the bots work in those structured environments.
Right.
Just moving stuff around. That's all they have to do.
You would personally like to have a robot in your home?
Absolutely. And I think my kids would too. I'm always on my kids' case to pick up their toys. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they would love to have a humanoid robot. And for all the other reasons I think that people talk about, laundry, cooking, cleaning, all that stuff, it would be great. And I think ultimately that's the world that we're headed towards.
And last question here, in the context of the ethical argument for robots, not just from worker automation, but the idea that humans aren't interacting with humans, we're interacting with a evolutionary, an AI that's embodied. Is this the same as the taxi drivers getting mad about Uber? Like, are you just techno optimist? Technology doesn't stop, and at the end of the day, you have to get with the program or you die.
Yeah, I would say rather than being a techno optimist, I'm a economics realist. If we invent a form of labor that is more efficient, cheaper, better than humans, then we should do that from an economic standpoint. And there's countless examples of that in history, right? In the past, when telephones were invented, you had to physically connect two lines together in order for people to talk. So a whole new industry of switchboard operators was born, and we had 340,000 women doing this work, right? And it was a well-paying job, but it also had its challenges, right? There's, it's kind of an interesting thing to look at, but it's the same thing with this. If we find a better way of doing things, we as humans are going to adopt that over time.
Right.
Right. So I don't think it's necessarily being a techno optimist. It's just looking at the numbers, and that's how I've approached this. I'm looking at the numbers. What does it cost to deploy a human to do certain type of work? What will it cost to deploy a robot? The advantage is huge, and so there's no reason that we won't do that.
All right. That's it. Thank you, Cern, for joining. This was awesome. This blew my mind as someone who's very interested in the space. I hope everybody got to check it out. Please make sure to follow Cern on Twitter. I'm sure you can tweet at him any questions and he'll try to respond on what's going on in the world of robotics. And yeah, we'll do this again. Thank you, Cern. Means a lot.
Great. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.